Go start the recording and we can get started.
Okay.
All set.
Great. All right. Thanks, Molly.
Mhm.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Zidell. I'm a senior account executive at Bales. I'd like to welcome everybody today to our second of the July series of Informative Fridays presentation. As you know, our topic is for today's financial supply chain management allocations. John Simpson will be doing, who's a senior finance consultant, will be presenting the financial details and doing the majority of the presentation. But before I turn things over to John, I'd just like to give everyone a quick overview of who we are at Bales, in case some of you are not familiar with us. Bales was founded by Jamie Bales back in 1995. We've been part of the Infor partner community going back to the 1997 timeframe. So as you can tell, we've got some very deep roots with Lawson and Infor. From a services perspective, we do only Lawson Infor consulting, whether it be managed services, full implementation of Cloud Suite and financial and supply chain management, technical consulting, training, everything in and around Infor exclusively. So needless to say, we're a very well-respected consulting firm in the Infor community, as well as one of the premier partners with Infor. So much so that we were involved in the development of Infor Cloud Suite and even delivered the training programs for the Infor personnel and some of the partners. People like John, he's a senior finance consultant. He averages over 15, all of our consultants average over 15 years of experience with the Lawson Infor systems, whether it be financial, HR, supply chain, technical. So we've got a very deep bench and some very experienced consultants that work with our clients. Lastly, and probably very important, recently we were acquired by Nordic Global Consulting out of Madison, Wisconsin. Nordic has made us a subsidiary of their organization, which means basically we are part of them and can also work with their global consultants. Nordic specializes in Epic, Cerner, and Meditech implementations. So what is unique about the fact that we're part of them now is that we can now provide not only ERP implementation with Infor, but we also have the ability and a very deep bench to integrate your Infor application with your EMR, EHR application, such as Epic, Meditech, or Cerner. So we've been very fortunate to be a part of Nordic, and a lot of our healthcare customers are taking advantage of the not only the ERP expertise we have as an organization, but also the EMR and EHR expertise we have. So it puts us in a very unique position that no other Infor partner can state that they've got all that expertise under one umbrella. Just a quick note, today's session is going to be recorded. Molly will be sending out a link to all the registrants. If you're registered, if you're not registered, just send Molly an email at molly.velasco@balesllc.com, and she'll be glad to send you the link for the presentation. Or if you want to share that with your colleagues, please do so. We encourage that. Again, thanks for joining us today, and let me turn things over to John.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is John Simpson, and a little bit before we get, to talking a little bit about me, just wanted to go over our agenda today a little bit. This is going to be an overview of allocations in FSM. I'm going to break this up into basically 4 parts: allocation setup, a little bit about maintenance, and then I'm going to go through processing and month end. Some of it, if you've lived in the S3 world previously, some of this stuff's going to seem very similar to you. If you're net new and haven't been involved in FSM yet, it'll be new, and you'll see some differences between this and S3 as well. And I could speak a little bit to that, but I'm going to really kind of focus on the FSM piece of it at this time. And so once we're done, we'll have a little Q&A. I know there was a few questions that were presented previously, but we'll open it up to any questions at the end. So there's myself and Tom, and a little bit about me. I got over 20 years of both finance and consulting experience. My finance and accounting experience have been in multiple industries, including telecom, retail, and healthcare. Both as a client, as a consultant. I was a Bales client prior to them being a Bales consultant. Actually, I'm an Infor certified consultant in an FSM for for the product suite to implement it. My previous work experience includes financial accounting and management. I've been in different corporate divisions, been in accounting and logistics, IT. I've been in financial analysis and forecasting. I've done budgeting and planning, and also, finance system implementation as a client and a consultant. And so I kind of understand both sides of the table. And I also work to do a lot of process improvement and streamlining. I do have expertise in designing, the FSM suite products to best complement a business and making sure that we streamline your existing processes and improve your user experience as well. So going to put in a new system. We want it to work the best way possible. So just a little bit of a disclaimer. So any of the stuff that we're presenting today really is just for informational purposes only. There may be some information in here, but really, basically, this is saying, hey, this is for informational purposes only. If you do have any needs or further questions, more than happy to talk to, us or any of us at Bales and schedule some time, and we can actually work with you to tailor it best to your needs. So just a little disclaimer there that, hey, this is our information, but do with it what you will. But I definitely would talk to us if you have any questions or serious needs when it comes to allocations or anything else. Okay, so part one, allocation setup. So I'm going to cover a little bit of an allocation overview for the setup piece, and then we're going to talk about the different pieces of FSM allocations, the control, allocation headers, the lines. And within the lines, we'll talk a little bit more about custom totals and groups and custom computes. There's simple allocations and more complex ones. So the stuff I'm going to cover is actually probably a common allocation, but it's a little more complex that I'm showing you an example with a custom compute statement and everything like that. And we'll also discuss a little bit about group override lists as well. Really, most of this will be on setup. The processing is pretty straightforward and easy, as is month-end close, very similar to the way it was in S3 in a lot of ways. So this is a little more setup and maintenance heavy. So, basically an allocation, it is used to move transaction balances from one set of dimensions to another based on a predetermined set of calculations. Those are derived by you, and basically you take costs from one area and move it to another. You could split transactions based on a flat split. In other words, an even split. You can do a weighted average. You could do an average on units. I know there was a question on pushing expenses based on units. I think headcount was the question. And you can also use other calculations as well. The expenses can be allocated between companies or within the same company. There's a couple different ways of doing that, which we'll talk a little bit about later. The transactions can be posted to either the same ledger or different ledgers. Like you could actually assign a separate ledger if you wanted to post your allocations. So there may be a need to do that as well. Also the source information, you can pull source information a lot of different ways. It's a little different than the way S3 was, but you could still do that. You have the ability to a lot of different ways to slice and dice the data to both, capture it and allocate the data. The first piece of the allocation puzzle, if you will, is the control itself. Think of the control is sort of like the grouping of all of your allocations. So I'm going to set up an allocation control, and I'm going to use that for things that may share the same processing settings. They may be, it may be the period type, month, quarterly, yearly. Maybe I have a need for a calendar for all allocations that work off a certain calendar or work off a certain currency table if you're, a multi-currency organization. Basically, if I'll use a month-end close process as an example. If I have a month-end close process, I may create month-end close allocations, and this is something that I'm going to run at the end of every month. So the example you'll see here really is a month-end allocation close. So what it does though, just, this kind of defines something. So this, defines the period type, wave my, mouse here a little bit, the period type. It actually has all your allocations listed here and your dimension structures here, which we'll talk a little bit about in the, kind of moving forward, but these are your hierarchies, your dimensional hierarchies. So you can define them on the control. This is also where you will run your allocations. So when you're in month-end close, you're ready to close the books, you're going to run your allocations from the control for this. Once you create an allocation, it works somewhat similarly to a journal entry or an invoice in the sense that you have a header and you have lines. Really not the same thing, but sort of the same premise. So the allocation header, what that does, it's basically the framework for the individual allocation. You're defining some of the processing rules. You're defining some of the different processing things that you may want done, whether it's setting your ledgers. Hey, this is my transaction and my source ledger. You can define default structures again. So you may have one set of default structures in control. You may redefine your default structures on this allocation, which means I can then further refine that and change that on the allocation to allocation basis. Yeah, I can also set the group. So as for instance, if I have COGS allocations, cost of goods sold, I can group all my COGS allocations together by creating a group and grouping them together so I can run them all at once. You may want to run all your COGS allocations maybe in the beginning of close once you get your gross margin and sales all in and run it that way. And then you can, so you can set different groups. Additionally, and one of my favorite things, honestly, is this allow multiple postings box. What this does, it actually allows you to run this allocation more than once in a month. So I think we've all been there at some point where if you have allocations, you run them, we're done for the month, you run your allocations and someone says, hey, we got to book another entry. So depending on how your allocation is set up, you could actually go and rerun this. You may need to reverse your prior allocation and post everything. Or if you build your allocation a certain way, you can then just run the net balance and then push the net balance back out. So one of the things we're going to talk about most are allocation lines. So what the allocation lines themselves do is they actually define the calculation methods to indicate the balance to be allocated and also define the rules on how these lines are created and allocated out. So there'd be 4 tabs to each allocation line: your parameters tab, structures tab, your from mapping tab, and your to mapping tab. Each do specific things. So your parameters tab basically is what's collecting your source data. Hey, here is either a compute statement, say here, grab this custom total, we've got a custom group based on the total, or you're defining, here's my dimensions that I want to pull, whether it's summary or whether it's a posting dimension. And then it's defining some other options on there as well. So that's saying, hey, this is the data I want to allocate. Your structures tab does what the rest of them do. Hey, maybe I have a need on each line to have a unique structure. You can then further define it on there. And then you got your from mapping and your to mapping. So your from mapping, basically, you are then defining the dimensions and your calculations for your from mapping, basically where it's coming from. Where do I want that, for lack of a better term, credit to be posted to? And your to mapping, which is how do I want my allocation to split and where am I booking it to? And I think the to mapping is probably the more dynamic piece of this for the most part. And that's probably what we kind of talk about the most. So a little bit about parameters. So again, the parameters define the total, defines the allocation options and source data to be allocated. Basically, the first thing you're going to do is set your posting options, and that's going to basically determine how this line is going to work. There's different valid combinations, and they do different things, right? A consolidate would consolidate whatever grouping of data is to one data point, and then retain means is pushing it out to one data point. Consolidate and compute kind of does what you think it does. It's consolidating, and then it's calculating the amount, by a compute statement to push it out. I think one of the most common that I tend to use is consolidate and split, which is I'm consolidating my source data And then my from data is split based on my parameters that I may be setting up. And then a split, which is split into multiple transactions and split the derived source amount using a split method that you define. I tend to use, I think, consolidate split the most, just as an aside, but that's just, I guess, the stuff that I have built. And you can see here here's what an allocation line looks like in the parameters tab. And you can see in this case, this is where I'm starting to build my basically what this is a sales allocation split out based on a weighted average cost of sales or weighted average sales amount for each accounting unit in this case. So I've got my parameters where I've set consolidate and split. I've got my source percentage at 100%, then my auto reverse, right? Which is technically set on the allocation itself. So I just leave that to default. But if you wanted to further define your lines, you can as well. You also have other options too, where maybe I want to do year-to-date costs. I know, maybe a third-party freight allocation. If you're allocating it to the stores, there may be a need to do year-to-date instead of month-to-date if you wanted to. So there's an option there to do year-to-date or life-to-date. If you wanted to allocate units, you can do it that way. These are kind of some additional allocation options. And again, the source address at the bottom, that is what's defining what source data you want to allocate. So that's what's saying, hey, grab this grouping of accounts from these grouping of accounting units. This can be done in a few different ways. I've done using a source compute statement. I've done using a source address, basically saying, hey, here's my grouping of accounts. Take my data. And then the structures tab. We'll get a little more into alternate hierarchies in a little bit. I'll save that mystery for a minute, but this does what you think it does. Basically, I've defined my structures on the group, and then I say, well, no, I want this allocation to have a different structure, so you can define it on the allocation header. And then maybe even further, maybe you have yet another need for a specific line to have a different hierarchy. You can define it there. So this just basically further defines your hierarchy. A little more about this, though. And the reason I keep bringing up hierarchies is this. FSM has flexible hierarchies, which are really easy to use and really easy to maintain and modify. These are great if you need things like an alternate hierarchy for different reasons. You may have more than one hierarchy for reporting. You may have more than one hierarchy for your allocations, because if you make a lot of changes to your chart of accounts, or maybe your chart of accounts doesn't fit your needs for your allocations, you can create an allocation hierarchy and you can leave that static while you make your changes to other hierarchies. So it's just another way of kind of having your summaries roll up the way you want. Different than S3 in the sense of using level groups and stuff like that. But yeah, I personally think it's a lot easier. And it's very flexible and easy to use. And honestly, I think it's a great function. And having that makes allocations really easy to use. It's just a little maintenance on the backside when you're adding dimensions. And we'll talk about that a little later as well. So the from mapping. So from mapping, as we kind of discussed earlier, this is basically redefining where you want your from entry, your from transaction line to be posted, right? You basically fill out your dimensions as you see here. I've filled out all three of my from mapping dimensions. These dimensions, other than the entity, actually are different than what was on my parameters. So I basically is saying, hey, I have a specific account for my allocation, and this is going to be what I'm going to use. So I'm going to book it to the same accounting unit, but I'm actually I want it to post my credit balance in this case to this account. And that's actually redefining my dimensions here. So technically speaking, it'll pull from whatever source address parameters you have set up here. It'll override that. I personally tend to fill them all in if, just as a habit, I guess. But this is defining your from. And you can also do a multiple override if needed here too, which is basically, you can set up a list and use your multiple override dimensions and actually do it that way. I mostly use single overrides and then multiple overrides when it comes to my from mapping. So to mapping. So here's kind of, I think, the piece that is usually has the most work. What this is doing, the two mapping tab is telling you how and where you want to allocate your costs. So it's the whole point we're doing allocations, right? We're moving costs from your from mapping to your to mapping. So this is kind of how do I want to split it, and where do I want to split it? And this is I think where most of the work is when it comes to setting up an allocation, because depending on how you set up your to mapping, and we'll talk about this, when we get into the maintenance aspect of it, how you set up your to mapping, varies, right? And I personally would look at my setup and kind of how I operate as a company and determine how I would want to set up my to mapping. So for a single override, which is overriding one dimension, and this is what I built in this case. So we're overriding the accounting unit dimension to push a weighted average cost of sales, so an expense for a weighted average cost of sales out. A single override overrides a single dimension on the string for allocating costs. All dimensions must be defined on the to for the override to work. In other words, if I have 3 required dimensions, then I need to define at some point on this to mapping all 3 dimensions, whether that's all 3 in a single override, whether that's 2 on a single, and then my third being calculated as a weighted average cost of sales. But you got to define all of them for it to work, or else it defaults to the source, and it's not going to do what you're expecting it to do. If you have a split, that actually is defined on the multiple override side. Oddly enough, you choose a single dimension for your multiple override side, and then you have an option to use like a list to allocate or a custom compute to allocate your expenses. And this is kind of what it looks like. So this is an example of a weighted average cost of sales using a summary group weight compute. I built this without needing to maintain a list. So this, I've defined 2 of my 3 dimensions, accounting entity and account. I want my accounting entity to be 100. I'm posting to 95,000, but I'm actually allocating this to all the other accounting units under the hospital. And basically, I could do it a few different ways. In this case, in this slide, I'm talking about lists a little bit, but you could actually create a list that has all your accounting units and your dimensions on there. You can maintain a manual override list, or you could maintain what's called a group override list if you wanted to. In this case, the way that I did it is without a list, which is using a summary. My summary is hospital, and then all the accounting units under the hospital summary account, they interact with that group weight compute, right? If I were to leave that blank, it would allocate the costs evenly to everything under hospital, just push it all to all of them. But what I did is I said, here's the summary of accounting units, which is my summary override here. I can point here. And then I said, give me my weight compute statement here, and all the, for everything that has sales, book it under there. So this is pushing the cost to all the stores that have sales, or all the accounting units that have sales. So that's what using a group weight compute could do for you. And so this is what, to build a group weight compute statement, you're going to need 2 things. A custom compute statement, actually, is what I should call it. You need to build a formula and a custom total. The first thing you need to do is to set a custom total. So in this case, this is a custom total based on the General Ledger Total Business class. And what I do to create this, and this, by the way, works for both source computes and actually your weight compute statement here, which is defining my scenario, which is 2, my accounting entity 100 US dollars. It's saying, hey, everything under the 2 hospital dimension, and my chart account is operating revenue. So I'm saying everything under operating revenue, give me that summary and give it to me for every accounting unit under hospital. And then you assign a period in the core. Really, the period is just to validate the data. So I grabbed a period that I don't have data in it and defined it. So this can be used to do 2 things. This can be used to split costs like this one, or you could actually define one of these to pull source data. So if you don't have a single summary for the data that you're planning on pulling, well, you kind of need one in this case. But you could create a summary, a custom total, and a custom compute statement to pull the data in rather than just grab a summary on your dimensions and use a custom total for this case. So in this case, I'm using it for kind of the two. Once you have your custom total actually defined, then you got to build the compute statement. And these do look a little different for those of you that have used version 9 and 10 allocations. These are a little bit different. And the way that it reads is this. This compute statement is allocating for each accounting unit. So it's basically saying, give me my custom total for every accounting unit that is defined on the line. My entity year period allocation context, whatever that allocation period that you set, give it to me for the entity year period. So that overrides that period 7 under here and give me my net functional amount. So what this is doing is giving me a custom split. It's giving me my weighted average cost of sales based on everything under the total for each accounting unit for the period I defined and the amount. And this is what actually drives the split costs. Another option is to do this all in what's called a multiple override. What a multiple override does is instead of actually doing a single dimension on the single override and then splitting that dimension, the multiple override actually does it a little bit differently. You have to define all of your dimensions on a multiple override, all your dimensions on that multiple override in a list. Then from that list, you can create a custom compute statement to split it based on that list. For me, it's the list. The nice thing is, in this case, is you can create a single step allocation if you wanted to split across entities. And you can just create a list and maintain the list. And then you use your custom compute statement and then allocate costs. And it basically looks at that list itself and says, okay, here's the dimensions on this list. I'm going to have custom compute based on this list and then weighted average cost. Or you could do a flat split or a fixed percent split and use a list and do it in the same way. You could define all your dimensions and do this. The downside of this, in my opinion, is the fact you have to maintain a list. If you tend to add a lot of dimensions, if I go and add, if I'm constantly adding accounting units, this may be this may be one of those things that's just annoying to keep maintaining constantly. And that's one of those things, hey, how are you going to build this? And this, I think, is, I would say, kind of where you have to kind of determine what the best course of action is. But there is a multiple override option as well. The next thing is going to be allocation maintenance. And I wanted to put this in here because allocations, like anything else, have to be maintained. You maintain a chart of accounts, you maintain an accounting unit list in your hierarchies, you have to maintain the allocations in the same way. This is where I alluded to in the beginning of how you build your allocations really determines your business needs, right? And that I think is key to how you set allocations up. So that's my first slide here, basically saying, you can do an allocation multiple ways. It depending on how your business is set up and how you maintain your business, right? Your financial system would be how I would choose to build this if it was me. I'd ask a few questions like, hey, do you add a lot of accounting units? Is your do you add a lot of new companies? Like, is this something where you have a multiple company entity, but you're adding companies constantly? Because that may be something to consider too. Do you add a lot of accounts? And are you making a lot of changes to the dimensions? So all of these are things that would say you could, depending on how your company's set up, like these are questions that I would ask. Also, does the chart of accounts or dimension hierarchy summaries, do they really match with the totals you need for allocations? Because I've seen it where how the reports roll up are not how maybe allocations necessarily want to be run. Like maybe they have some accounts that are in and some accounts that are not. And that, I think, alludes to some of the stuff down the way here where that could be a need for a multiple additional hierarchy. So mapping overrides is kind of the first thing, right? Basically, override calculations, those things, they're used by summaries, and it's different from S3 because those, those level groups in account groups can be maintained, but the overrides in the chart of accounts, they'll change the total that are being used for the allocating and the expense. So much like, hey, if I got an account list, I can just add or take away accounts. Like this works based on summaries in a hierarchy. So you got to ask yourself when you're adding these new accounts and under that total, is this really part of that sales calculation I want, for instance, or, COGS or whatever? If not, then there's kind of a need for a halt in a hierarchy, something that I can leave static. I set my accounts that I want in there, and I don't need to really worry about that as much. Custom totals, the same thing, right? One of the nice things about FSM is changing your hierarchies, and it's an ease of changing and moving hierarchies depending on your business needs or depending on changes that you see. There's not, it doesn't take a lot to move a hierarchy. It's a point and a click. With that, you change hierarchies or add summaries. That changes maybe where my general ledger, my operating revenue pulls from. And so what'll happen is somebody will move this around and change it, and this sort of breaks it. Really, the only thing you need to do is to come in here, hit set dimensions, reset your dimensions, hit validate, and it will save and validate. And as long as you get a balance and the balance is correct, you're good to go. It's not a lot of work to maintain that, but that's a piece that if you're using a single hierarchy and if you change the roll up of how those hierarchies work, you should take a look at your custom totals to make sure that they're still calculating, or else you'll find out that it will go to one dimension on your allocation on the way out. Same thing with group override lists, which I think is one of the most common things that you would need to maintain in an allocation. If you use a list for any reason, and there's reasons for needing to list for sure. When you add departments, to a hospital or you're adding stores to a retailer, you need to, if that needs to be part of the allocation, those lists need to be maintained. Easiest thing in the world to do, go in, just add the stores. You can use ISD to upload it. But if they're not in there, they're not going to allocate. The example that I showed with building allocations in the lists, that was a way that I'm going to a single entity and I'm using a single dimension. So as long as those stores fall under that summary, then it gets calculated. There's no list needed for that. If I was to build a multi-entity allocation using the same format, I may need to split by company first, my first step, my allocation, and then for each of those companies needing to allocate, then actually allocate the balance in that company down to the stores in that company or the departments in that company. So maybe I have corporate overhead, a hospital, and 5 clinics. Those are each different entities, and I would need to build basically step 1 that allocates to all my entities, step 2 to allocate down. Then the only list you need to maintain is your company list, and that's easy. You're not adding companies very often. But if you use a group override list, you do need to maintain that. Again, it's really easy, but it is a step that you have to kind of be wary of. Alternate hierarchies is the last thing I think I wanted to cover. I think this is a good idea if you make a lot of changes to your hierarchies, whether that's your dimensions, like your accounting unit or finance dimension 1 or finance dimension 3, or if it's your chart of accounts. If you have needs that are different than your chart of accounts, or if you change your chart of accounts a lot, using an alternate hierarchy is going to reduce your maintenance, all told. You can set it and basically forget it. And as long as your roles are in there until you have a new account that's added, then you need to attach it not only to the initial, we'll call it the enterprise chart of accounts, but you're also going to have to attach it to this chart of accounts as well. If you don't do that, then it's not going to be included in there. So there's an additional maintenance. But if it's a single account, it's literally a button on the summary saying add posting to summary, and you load it and you're good to go. But that's kind of the downside, but I think it's a very small one. But an alternate hierarchy that you can attach to your summary if you need it, or your line, is a really easy way of maintaining that. But you just need to be wary that if you add an account one place, you need to add it both, or else it's not going to be the same. So this piece of the presentation is going to go by a little faster. I think because processing and month-end close is really actually quite easy using allocations. So I'm going to go through and processing the overview, calculating, journalize, and rerunning it, and posting the allocation into the GL. So really there's 3 steps in my opinion to processing an allocation. You could make it 2, but I call it 3 just because I like to kind of measure twice and cut once personally. Calculate it. I'm running my calculations and I'm validating those calculations. If I'm comfortable the calculations are correct, I can then journalize my allocations. And that's basically pushing my journals to the GL to be posted. And then I'm having I'm having someone on the finance team, maybe it's me, maybe it's somebody else in accounting, actually posting the allocation entries into the GL and refreshing the global ledger, the cubes. Once those 3 steps are done, assuming there's no issues, you can then validate the GL, make sure everything zeroes out as you expect it, and allocations are done for the month. It's really kind of that easy. So kind of going through in a little more detail, here's the first piece. On my allocation group, I can go ahead and run an allocation. I can run an allocation or a group. Once those allocations are done, you can go to the runs tab, which is not on this slide, and it's going to pull up something that looks like this. I know in S3, for those of you guys that had S3, you get some reports, right, that you can go and review. Same thing here. So I run my reports. You can choose the reports to come, to be included in the run, and you get a PDF for those reports where you can download that and review to make sure that you get the balances you want and that it's going where you need it to. Also, though, you can click on transactions really and extract that as well if you wanted to into CSV or Excel and make sure that it zeros. Once you're done with this and you're comfortable that this is good, there's a journalize button right there. You can go ahead and journalize that and it pushes your cost to the global ledger, and really it's right there. So I'm running my allocation, I hit journalize. It journalizes to the global ledger, and really that leads us to the last step, right? And I guess one small thing is, technically speaking, on the run job, you can click journalize if you wanted to. I personally prefer to do it separately just because I don't like reversing entries and reposting if something goes wrong. So I always kind of try to take a look at it. So I'll run it without it, and then I journalize separately. But once that's done, you're posting it. And same thing as any other journal, right? You go into your controller role, you go in there, you grab, journals, posting, and you just post your allocations and it posts to the GL. Last but not least, you run your report, and you refresh your cubes, and you're good to go to kind of check. Last but not least is month-end close. So this will be another kind of quick one as well. There's really not much to closing and allocations, and that depends on if system control is set up, right? So if you have system control set up on your company, like you see here, oops. Here we go. System control for the company. You can set up system control like I did here, and have it set up to post when and you just have to run the job and post it. And when you're done with that and you have this set up, you have to close allocations prior to closing a GL. So, if you have allocations, this is a good one to have set up. Just prevents you from closing GL first and having to go back and run your allocations. But once that's set up and I need to post it, it's really just this. Under the controller role, when everything is good and it's the last step you need to do, you can go close cost allocation period. And what that's going to do is close that for the month and roll it forward, which means you're free to close the GL, and you're good to go. And that's pretty much it for allocations. I'm going to leave it open. We got, some time left for questions, for any open questions. And I'll be quiet and let's see if we have any questions.
Nothing in the chat right now, but let's give it a few minutes in case anybody's busy typing.
So I guess while we're waiting, there was 2 questions that were submitted. The first question I think somebody asked had to do with, I think it was invoices and distributing invoice amounts for service cost or something like that. If it's an AP invoice, really, if I was to allocate costs for a service, to use a GL allocation for this would really be, if you have a need to do this quite a bit, you could set up an allocation, basically book all your service invoices to one account, to one accounting unit, and then allocate it out that way. But the easier solution, I think, would be set up a distribution code on your actual service, on your invoice. When you're creating those service invoices, if they don't have already lines, lines associated with it, like if it's coming over from matching and stuff like that, and it's a service invoice, it's already got kind of a line, it's going to, set it up there. But you could either book that existing thing there, or if you're creating a basic for a service invoice, you could then actually create a distribution code and put your distribution percents there, and then it'll allocate there through AP when you post it. The second question had to do with units and headcount. And I think the question was, hey, is there a way to allocate costs based on headcount in units? And yes, there is. So it depends on how your system is set up. If you have, and I was thinking about this earlier because I saw it the other day and I was thinking, well, how would I do that? And I guess that entirely depends on how headcount is recorded in the system. I would say first thing I thought was this would be a good solution for a list, right? I have my departments. I know what my head count is. I can set my list there to have a fixed percent on head count. And then anytime that head count changes, somebody goes in and makes a change to the list, and that's your fixed percent to split. My second thought is, well, what about a stat account? You could actually set up a stat account that you maintain your head account by department in there. You can load a balance in there every month. And you could build a custom total and a custom group to pull that stat account and pull that balance and allocate it that way. So those are two options that you could use to do it. Both of which would require some level of maintenance, right? You would have to load but I would doubt that it would be that much maintenance because I don't, depends on how much headcount changes. I guess if it's a retailer, you're dealing with hours. You could use whatever units you're booking to your regular pay or your payroll accounts and do it that way too. I hope that's what you were looking for on that. If you're out there.
John, we did have a question come in from Paul, and he's asking, how is an allocation group defined in FSM?
Sure, I can show you that. I'm gonna jump over to here. So allocation groups, if I've got my allocation, I'm going to go to Allocation Control right here. So here's my month-end allocations. And on my allocation itself, there's a group right here. You could go and create an allocation group, really just going here and creating one. Maybe I just want to call it COGS. Basically, it's kind of not much there. But I can create a COGS allocation group like this, and then I can just assign it to my allocation like that. That's really all there is to it. If you've got a bunch of allocations, you could actually go as far as uploading that to the allocation itself, or just assign it to it. That's really all there is to it for the allocation group. It's basically in name only, and you can just basically kind of link them all together.
Great. And we have another question. How do I create a custom compute?
Oh, that's the question, right? So I would love to tell you that I am an expert at the custom computes. I can tell you in technical terms, it is by trial and or error, and a lot of begging and pleading for information, to be honest with you. So all joking aside, there's 2 steps to a custom compute. I'm going to open up this one right here. The first step is your custom total, right? So if I open up this custom compute, I have to create that custom total, which is here, and you can see they actually give you an option to click here where you can create your totals. So the first thing is you want to define what balance and what data you're grabbing. In this case, it's sales revenue for all my company 100 accounting units. And then you would create a builder. And the way that I've been doing this is I've got my kind of a generic compute statement I start with which is this. And then I hit the builder. I fill in a field name, my type, and then the size. You know, I don't want to do this because I'll blow up my custom group here. But so I choose that. I choose my number of decimals. Usually for me, I start with those two fields and I leave all this blank, because what this does is you could actually write piece by piece your function based on the business class that you have. I find it much easier is if I know this is accounting unit business class and I know this pulls from General Ledger total, and I'm probably always going to use the majority of my stuff here, I copy and paste this whole thing in here because most of this is already set up. And then I define my dimensions here. So you're always going to need General Ledger total entity or period, allocation context period. That is defining what period the allocation is set to calculate. Net functional amount here, this is defining from your General Ledger total summary what amount. So if you've ever gone in and looked at your looked at your business class and your fields, you'll see net functional amount in there. And then the last piece of it is this General Ledger total. So there's your business class, and then the summary, the custom total that I built here. And so basically this is accounting unit business class is saying, give me the total of the General Ledger total from this summary. I want whatever is under accounting unit General Ledger total, give me the list on here, equals accounting unit, which is on this business class. This is defining each accounting unit for the period defined on the allocation, and this is the amount that I want back. This is developing your percent, and then that is what's calculating your weight compute here. That is, so in long story short, you can build one or multiple of those. I have built weight computes that have a single, I have added multiple compute statements together, or total custom totals together by putting plus in between the last set of parentheses. If I have like 4 or 5 custom totals, I've needed that if I have multiple companies and I don't feel like building a bunch of different hierarchies or a bunch of different summaries, I may just put some stuff together. I have actually like subtracted totals out of it doing the same thing. So that's kind of in high level how you build a weight compute. Once you kind of understand what the fields are, it gets easier, but I would definitely start with the basic kind of formula, like the one that I think is attached to here. And I think also Infor Docs has a couple of examples of formulas on there. But it's to kind of summarize custom total, then the compute based on the custom total for the dimension that you can see here I'm defining, which is accounting unit.
Great. Thank you, John. So far, that's all the questions that have come in. So probably we could have Tom take over, and if any more come in, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, John. Hey, John, great presentation and great information.
Sure. Thanks
for pulling that together. And Molly, thank you for coordinating the session today, and you and the Bales team. And most of all, thanks to all the attendees for joining us today. Before I let you go and enjoy your summer Friday, just a couple of reminders for our final 2 sessions in Informative Friday for July. Next week at 1 o'clock Eastern, we'll be talking about in-basket proxy versus full proxy. Bales presenters Matt and Jared will go over that. And then on Friday the 29th, we'll be covering benefits of supplier portal. So mark your calendars for that, share that with your colleagues. If anyone's interested in those topics, please email Molly to register, or I guess they can also register via Work Out Loud. Lastly, our next quarterly Informative Friday series will be in October. We do them every quarter, so keep an eye out for that. And then also just wanted to make you aware of an offering that we have at Bales. We call it Coffee with Consultants, which is a great opportunity to chat with one of our subject matter experts about a topic or questions that you might have. It's a no-charge half-hour session with our experienced consultants. So if you have any questions about what we covered today, any follow-up questions, or any other parts of your Infor application, please reach out to us on our website, or again, reach out to Molly and we'll get that scheduled. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a fantastic weekend, and hope the weather's going to be good wherever you might be. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Appreciate it.
Great job, John. Thank you.